All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
I'm Garrett Bergquist, government reporter for Wish TV and the producer of All Indiana Politics. It's the marquee political race of the year in Indiana. Governor Eric Holcomb is term limited, and the Republican, Democratic, and Libertarian parties are pulling out all the stops to claim the governor's chair. All three of the candidates on your ballot should be familiar to you. Republican Mike Braun has represented Indiana in the United States Senate for the past 6 years. Democrat Jennifer McCormick was Indiana's final elected superintendent of public instruction. Libertarian Donald Rainwater is making an encore appearance from the 2020 race. McCormick was a Republican when she held office. She switched parties in 2021. She's built her campaign around education and around working across party lines. If she's elected, she would be the first Democrat to serve as governor since the late Joe Kernan left office in 2005. Let's bring in the Democratic nominee for governor, Jennifer McCormick. Dr. McCormick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
So let's begin with your education plan. You've called for significant increases in teacher pay. How do you plan to pay for it?
Yeah, first of all, we have to get that pay up to be competitive with non-educator professionals. Right now we have 3,300 openings and we're never going to fill them. So it's a matter of getting that salary up, which we know is going to be expensive, but that also is a reminder that we're giving $1.6 billion to private schools that are going away from our public schools. And so that would be a huge chunk of it without raising taxes, without just reallocating where those dollars go.
You would tighten up the eligibility requirements for the vouchers then?
I would tighten up the voucher program, absolutely. Right now, the eligibility is $220,000 deemed to be the poverty level for a voucher and for a family of four. And so, and I'm sure they're trying to go after universal vouchers the next session, and I'm sure my opponent is going to support that. But to me, it's about making sure that our public schools are taken care of, as it is a constitutional requirement, and there's a lot of money there that could go right back into our teachers.
How do you balance your call for greater school curriculum flexibility with greater accountability, particularly when it comes to the vouchers?
Yeah, we are under immense amount of accountability already. And so making sure that that would be our public schools that are under that accountability. And so making sure that we allow schools to have the flexibility they need in order to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. I know when I was a local superintendent at Yorktown, my needs, my demographics, my curriculum looked different than maybe a Ben Davis, just surely because of size, location, the needs of our students. And so making sure that we're allowing that autonomy to happen so everyone can be successful. But when you look at what's happening with private schools, the accountability is very, very loose, but there's a lot of money. Again, $1.6 billion. I know my opponent is supporting what he is calling school choice, which he is saying is the parental choice, but really it's not. It really is about not parent choice, it's about the schools choosing who they're taking and who they're not. Let's turn to property taxes. You've called for increasing the homeowner deduction by $1,000, increasing the state and local income tax deduction by $1,500, and expanding senior citizen deductions. How did you arrive at those numbers? From the beginning, we've talked about bringing back common sense and bipartisanship, bringing back the balance to the State House. So to come up with our plan, we looked at really good language that had been submitted by good legislative language that had been submitted by Republicans and Democrats, put a plan together that made sense, that already had a fiscal on it. So on day one, we could roll it out and people could have relief, all Hoosiers, but particularly our seniors, our renters, our veterans, but all Hoosiers would have a little bit of that relief. our plan differed from our opponent, who his first plan and version 2.0, since his first one was so bad, but our plan did not go after the local level. And I think that's why it was so well received, because we still have to fund our schools and our libraries and our parks and our fire and our police. We don't want to strap our towns and our cities any more than they already are, from what we're hearing from our local leaders. So that's why we went the state level route more so than the local tax dollars for that whole purpose. But it would allow for $600 million in property tax relief and be ready day one.
Would this realistically have an impact on individual Hoosiers' pocketbooks? It might only amount to maybe $100 or so.
It would have an impact. So they would see that in their local, or they would see that in their state income tax, and using those dollars to help pay for some of that property tax would be very beneficial. And again, you're talking $600 million. So it would have a positive impact for Hoosiers.
How do you minimize the loss of revenue?
And again, that's what we were trying to balance as far as the state sitting on a big surplus. So making sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure we have a surplus still, but chipping into that a little bit to provide relief that so many Hoosiers are saying they need, without going after the local level that are already telling us that they are strapped.
In our debate earlier in the month, you said that your property tax plan was central, or at least played a very large role in your housing plan. What are some other ideas that you have for helping Hoosiers find more affordable homes?
Yeah, and it is a challenge across the state. It's a challenge across the nation, and we're all feeling it. But in particular in Indiana, where our wages are 47th in the nation and not keeping up, and then you have the cost of housing that's going up, and so it's very difficult for young people who are trying to buy homes for the first time, or families who are trying to stay in a home, or seniors who are trying to stay in their home. The property tax plan that we released completely does that. It helps relieve some of that so people can buy a home or stay in a home. But we also looked at fair lending practices, making sure our renters are protected, making sure that we're being really good partners with our local level, so that when they have ideas of how to bring in affordable housing or build affordable housing, what does that look like and what do they need, and making sure that they can do it in an expedited fashion, and just really being a good partner with that. I know the other piece of that is when I'm across the state and I ask them, they're saying I'm building affordable housing and they start at $300,000. I mean, that's just not affordable for so many of our Hoosiers. So having those conversations is incredibly important. But, first step is prioritizing it.
Indiana's Medicaid system is short about $1 billion, and that's led to some very significant service cuts. First, would you implement any emergency funding for it once you became governor? And then second, what's your long-term plan to fix that problem and prevent any future issues after the next budget takes effect on July 1st of next year?
That is a perfect example of when you have one party rule for 20 years and no one's policing themselves, and all of a sudden there is an issue, major issue with Medicaid to the tune of over $1 billion. And I'm not a believer in you beat up people who are implementing the program. I think you have oversight and leadership and you hold them accountable. But one, doing a review of what is the problem, and I've been told that there are a lot of different problems and for a lot of different reasons. But I've also heard from those families who their children don't have the care they deserve. They're on big waiting lists for adults that they'll never get, or they were providing care for their family members that now they can't get that reimbursement, or it's much less. And so it's impacting not only just individuals, but our economy, because now we're strapping people who want to get in the workforce that can't. So making sure, one, we figure out what the problems are and do a deep review of that, but also two, being good partners at the federal level, because it is matching, and making sure that we are getting every dollar we can possibly get, and then be responsible going forward with planning and doing what we can do in order to fix it. It's not a fast fix. It just is not, because it's so expensive and it's such a mess. But it comes back to using common sense, bringing the right people at the table to find a solution.
You've called for restoring access to abortion services and passing a constitutional amendment to protect abortion. Is that realistic given the makeup of the legislature? The Republican Party very likely is going to control the legislature after Election Day, or at least one chamber.
Yeah, again, it's common sense. We're hearing from over 80% of the Hoosiers that want a citizen-led ballot initiative, so they have a voice in whether it's women's reproductive freedoms, or whether it's cannabis, or whether it's voucher programs. Right now, Kentucky's running a citizen-led initiative ballot question on vouchers. Let us have our voice. And isn't it sad that we're having to basically beg to have just the initiative put forth? But again, it goes back to working across the aisle, using that platform to better inform Hoosiers that we're one of the few states that doesn't have that option, but also to working with the General Assembly in order to get it done. I'm committed to it, but we'll see if our Republican friends are as well. But Hoosiers deserve that. We deserve a voice, and we deserve citizen-led ballot initiatives.
What's your plan for the LEAP district?
Yeah. So that's another area that, wow, a lot going on with the LEAP district. I love the economic development. I applaud the intent. I applaud Lilly for their commitment into the state. I also am a firm believer in bringing in good paying jobs, and high wage is so important, but you have to have people to fill those jobs, and they have to be healthy, and they have to be educated, and then the consumer has to be the same. That's incredibly important, but you can't do that in isolation. And what I've seen with that program is there's a lot of question on transparency and accountability, and sometimes perception becomes reality. Again, the intent, no one would argue, but the state is acting as a real estate agent, and there's a lot of questions about the lack of transparency. And then you get into water, and it's our natural resource, and it's so precious, and we have to be making sure that we're making really smart decisions. I've said since day one, right after I get elected, we're going to start working on a water management plan. We're one of the few states that doesn't have it. Mitch Daniels kind of played around with the water shortage plan, and then that went away under Pence. And so it's desperately needed when we are going to continue down that road. But we need to bring some more parameters around that program, work toward that intention of economic development, because it's so incredibly important. But we need to be realistic on it. Can't be a free-for-all.
One of the criticisms that's been leveled at the IEDC, particularly with regard to the LEAP district, is that it seems to be prioritizing economic growth in some parts of the state at the expense of other parts. So how would you ensure that all parts of the state see some economic growth?
And I've heard from a lot of locally elected officials at the, across the state, and they like the READY grants, they like the Stellar grants where it's targeted in regional growth. Now, they're not seeing the type of money that's in Boone right now for that particular LEAP project, but they like the approach of regional type of monies to give them to attract and retain good business and business development. And so continuing what's working. Now, they have said we need some red tape off that program a little bit, hold us accountable, but let us do what we need to do. So continue on what's working with a targeted approach, but also spread the wealth. I mean, there's a lot of places in Indiana that are desperately needing that quality of life that goes right back to economic development. So the approach is good, it's just how those dollars are being disseminated.
Indiana is scheduled to carry out its first execution in 15 years this December. There are 3 other men on death row who have exhausted their appeals. Would you seek execution dates for those 3 men?
Well, first of all, I mean, the law has spoken, and so I respect the law, and they have said this is what the consequence of their actions are, so I respect that. However, too, my concern with when we're looking at the death penalty is it's a very permanent solution to a very imperfect system. And we've heard far too many times where innocent people are put to death. We still have a lot of questions on the expense of it. But, like a school shooter, there are just circumstances where beyond a shadow of a doubt that someone is guilty of doing a horrific crime, the law speaks. But I also know, too, there has got to be no doubt because it is a very, very permanent solution. There's no perfect answer with the death penalty. But at times, if it's what the courts came up with and it's necessary and there is no doubt, but there are also a lot of times too where other things need to be looked at.
What's one issue we haven't talked about that you believe is not getting enough attention in this election?
Probably the education piece. It's very focused on, for a lot of it's been very focused on women's reproductive freedoms, which is obviously one of my passions, that we need to fight for women's reproductive freedoms. I know, too, my opponent has said that it didn't go far enough, and so they're wanting to go even more extreme with the abortion ban, birth control, IVF. That needs also some tension. But the whole education as a system, my opponent and his ticket are, all about banning books and bashing teachers, and that time is over. We need to say, okay, let's look at this as a system to take care of our kids, because it's driving everything with our economy. We need to look at childcare, which we're not having a conversation about. We need to make sure we're talking about universal pre-K. That post-COVID has that conversation is morphed a bit, but it still lingers with the impact, and we need to go back to say, what do we need to drill down to make sure kids are ready for school? And that 0 to 5 is going to be a very, very critical part going forward. A lot of states have figured it out. A lot of states are trying to figure it out, but our youngest of young have got to be on the radar. The other thing that's on the radar of so many that I just don't think we're having enough conversation with is senior care. I know Indiana's struggling to. A lot of our seniors don't have a good retirement plan, and they don't have options for senior care. They are sometimes not involved with their family, and they have very limited friends at that point in their life. And so that senior care piece needs to be a priority as well for the state of Indiana going forward.
What makes you the best choice in this race?
Because I'm not a lifelong politician. I am a wife. I am a mom, I am an educator, and I'm doing it for everyone, and I'm doing it for the reason to be a public servant. I'm not coming from Washington, D.C. That wasn't my goal, to be a lifetime, go from the State House to Washington, D.C. and come back to the State House. I mean, my opponent obviously has made a career out of this. That's not me. I'm the best choice because I am just the average common Hoosier who's trying to make things better for all of us. For me, it's not about a party. It's not about my income. He's one of the wealthiest people in Washington, D.C. as a senator. I am not. I'm a very, very middle class Hoosier, but I'm a better listener, and I can get things done.
Jennifer McCormick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Jennifer McCormick, Democratic candidate for governor. Early voting is underway. It continues until noon on Monday, November 4th. Election Day itself is on Tuesday, November 5th. And remember, you can catch All Indiana Politics every Sunday morning at 9:30, only on Wish TV. I'm Garrett Bergquist. Thanks for listening.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.